We are discussing part 3, Infrastructure, Energy and Industrial Policy. In this, we discussed chapter number 9 and half of chapter number 10a. From this scene, we are going to continue this chapter number 10a, that is the solar cost collapse and thermal. What is solar cost collapse and thermal? The 2015 question. What is the solar cost collapse and what it did to thermal power? The 2015 question asked 12.5 marker. The question is, to what factors can the recent dramatic fall in equipment cost and tariff of solar energy be attributed? What implications does the trend have for thermal power producers and related industry? This question was written in 2015 and the trend it describes has now run for a decade. Answer it as history with a conclusion, not as news. So 6 factors behind the fall. Separate equipment cost from tariff. There are different things and the question names both. So what is the equipment cost? Why equipment cost fell? Equipment cost fell for 3 reasons. First one, manufacturing scale and the experience curve. Global module manufacturing scaled massively, overwhelmingly in China, and unit costs fell with cumulative output. And the second one is technology. First one is what? Scale. Second one is what? Technology. So what is the technology related fall? Higher cell efficiencies, thinner wafers, less silver and silicon per watt. So comes to the third one, the global overcapacity. Modules supply persistently ran ahead of demand and prices reflected it. So tariff fell for 3 additional reasons that have nothing to do with equipment. Fourth one, competitive reverse auctions. India moved early from feed-in tariffs to auctions, and competition for the market drove bids down faster than costs fell. And fifth one is de-risking, which lowered the cost of capital. Solar parks that pre-acquire land, pre-obtain clearances and pre-build evacuation removed exactly the risks a developer cannot price, and payment security mechanisms did the same on the offtake side. Solar is capital cost business. Nearly all the cost is upfront. So a fall in the cost of capital moves the tariff more than a fall in the panel price. And the sixth one is long-term power purchases agreement with creditworthy central intermediaries. With creditworthy central intermediaries, which made the revenue stream bankable. The examinable insight here is the equipment cost fall was mostly imported. The tariff fall was largely policy made. Auctions, solar parks, and payment security are Indian contributions and they are the transferable lesson. So now the implications for thermal. Four and implications for thermal 4. And the fourth is the one that gets the marks. First one is plant load factor fell, then partially recovered and is falling again. All India PLF for coal and lignite 77.5% in 2009-10, 65.60 in 2013 and 14, 59.88 in 2016 and 17, 54.51 in 2020-2021. The trough here is what? Then 64.15 in 2022 23, 69.45 in 2024-2025, and 65.57 in 2025-2026. Then comes to second one, stranded and stressed assets. The 2009 to 20 decline is the standard thermal asset story. Capacity built on demand forecasts that did not materialize, financed by banks, and a substantial contributor to the fin balance sheet problem. So third one is the role of thermal changed. As variable renewables take a rising share of dispatch, thermal plants increasingly run as balancing capacity rather than base load, ramping up and down to follow the residual load. So the lowers PLF by design, and it also raises where heat rate and cost per unit. And fourth one is, and this is the deep answer, the missing money problem. A grid with high renewable penetration still needs firm capacity for the hours when the sun is down and the wind is still. But a plant that runs few hours cannot recover its fixed costs from an energy only tariff. So the grid needs that. So the grid needs water. So the grid needs the plant, and the market will not pay for it. So that is why the policy conversation has moved to capacity markets, ancillary service ancillary services markets, and storage, and why the survey names battery energy storage systems and pumped storage hydropower as the answer to renewable variability. And the financial year 2026 twist, which is current, coal PLF fell 3.88 percentage points in a single year, in a year when total generation grew 0.99% and peak demand actually fell 1.77%. So the latest PLF fall is not only renewable displacement story, it is also a demand story, and you should say both. Then comes to green energy corridors and why they are now the binding constraint. What are the green energy corridors and why now the binding constraint? This is 2013 question. 10 markers. The question is, write a note on India's green energy corridor to alleviate the problem of conventional energy. A 10-mark note in 2013. In 2026 is the most important scene in the energy story, and here is why. The problem is in one sentence. I am telling you, renewable energy is located where the sun and the wind are. Demand is located where people and factories are. So these are not the same places. Solar in Rajasthan and Gujarat, wind on the western and southern coasts, load across the whole country. So the green energy corridor is a transmission program, not a generation program. Interstate and intrastate transmission lines, substations, and the grid strengthening required to evacuate variable renewable power and keep the grid stable while doing it. So three things it must do that a conventional lines does not. What are those? What are those against conventional? Evacuate power from remote generation zones with no existing network. Absorb variability. Absorb variability. Output that swings with cloud cover and wind speed, which a grid designed for steady thermal dispatch was not built for. And balance across regions using the fact that it is not cloud, using that and balance across regions using that factor that is not cloudy everywhere at once. So now bring it to 2026, because this is where the marks are. The monetization pipeline, interstate transmission lines on BOOT, the largest asset class in NMP 2.0. What is NMP? National Monetization Pipeline. So the monetization pipeline, interstate transmission lines on BOOT, 22 lakh crore across 22,000 circuit kilometers. 22,000 circuit kilometers, 2 lakh crore interstate transmission lines on boot. So the single largest asset class in the entire national monetization pipeline 2.0. PGCAL transmission assets on securitization 33,500 crore across 15,295 circuit kilometers. Hydro securitization for NHPC and SJVN 12,000 crore across 4881 megawatts and 10 stations. The power sector total is 2,76,500 crore and of the within period power flows. 1,66,288 crore of 2,42,788 crore. 788 crore is direct to private investment. Now you have to say this, of the entire 16.72 lakh crore national monetization pipeline, the largest single asset class is not a road, not a port or not a railway. It is 2 lakh crore rupees of interstate transmission line awarded on build, own, operate, transfer through tariff based competitive bidding. That is the government of India stating in a budget document that transmission is the binding constraint on the energy transition. So two more points to close this scene. Storage is the second half of the same problem. Transmission moves power across space, storage moves it across time. A grid with 50 a grid with 53% of non-fossil capacity needs both. And the survey names battery storage and pumped storage hydropower explicitly alongside high capital costs and acquisition delays and grid availability as the three constraints on the renewable program. And the newest institutional answer is use this. Almost nobody has it. The India energy stack is a digital public infrastructure for the power sector. Under the Ministry of Power with REC Limited as a nodal agency. So it provides common digital rails for identity, data exchange, measurement and settlement on consent based sharing with data staying with its owners. Its purpose is to make peer-to-peer electricity trading, demand response aggregation and rooftop and battery monetization work at scale. The survey's own formulation is that from energy access to energy agency, from energy access to energy agency. Then we are moving to distribution, the unfinished half of the 2003 problem. This scene owns no past question that either way or our way we are going to discuss this. It is the connective tissue between the energy scenes, and it is where every energy question's conclusion should land. The asymmetry stated plainly. The Electricity Act 2003 in force from 15 June 2003 replaced three statutes: the Indian Electricity Act 1910, the Electricity Supply Act 1948, the Electricity Regulatory Commission Act 1998. It provided for open access in transmission, phased open access in distribution, mandatory state electricity regulatory commissions, power trading, mandatory metering, and a decisively license free generation. Generation was delicensed. Distribution was not. 23 years later, generation is majority privately owned, has no shortage, and runs a capacity surplus. Distribution remained a regulatory monopoly and accumulated 6.47 lakh crore of losses and 7.26 lakh crore of debit. But the turnaround is real and you must give it. An answer that only criticizes. Discounts is a 2019 answer. Profit after tax went from minus 67,962 crore in financial year 2014 to plus 2701 crore in financial year 2025. A historic first. AT and C losses from 2020 22.62 to 15.04%. The ACS ARR gap and accrual from 0.78 to 0.06 a unit. Late payment surcharge dues from 1.4 lakh crore in June 2022 to 4927 crore in January 2026. And the energy deficit from 4.2% in financial year 14 to 0.03 in financial year 26. So, and the next step is electricity amendment bill. 2026 proposes regulated competition in electricity distribution, cost reflective, cost reflective tariffs, payment security for generators, and regulatory accountability while retaining subsidized supply for vulnerable consumers. The sequence sentence here is the Electricity Act 2003 opened generation to competition and left distribution a licensed monopoly. 23 years later, generation is majority privately owned and has no shortage. So distribution posted accumulated losses of 6.47 lakh crore. That is not an argument. Competition solves everything. That is not that is not an argument that competition solves everything. Distribution has a natural monopoly where business and a universal service obligation that generation does not. It is an argument that where the 2003 Act's logic was applied, it worked, and where it was suspended, the problem persisted. So, India has met the commitment it actually made. Non-fossil installed capacity 53.2%, 4 years early. It has not met the target most people think it made, because 50% of energy needs from renewables was never the commitment, and the distance between those two sentences is the whole energy transition. Capacity is not generation, and generation is not energy. So the deficit now buys assets instead of consumption. Whether those assets reach everyone is a different question, and the budget does not answer it. So what is the most probable questions? What are the most probable questions? First one is India has already met its 2030 non-fossil capacity commitment. Examine why this does not mean energy transition is complete. So the capacity generation gap is the whole answer for this. The second one is access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy is described as essential to the SDGs. Assess India's progress against each of those four tests. So answer could be like this. Grade the four separately, do not average them. Then third one, transmission, not generation, is now the binding constraint on India's renewable energy transition. Discuss. So with the 2 lakh crore interstate transmission figure behind it. So in this way you have to write an answer as far as this particular probable question. So we are moving to the chapter 10b. Regarding this chapter is belongs to transport, urban and industrial policy. So what we are going to discuss is in this electronic toll collection, the 2024 question in four parts we are going to discuss in the first instances. So the 2024 question, what is the technology being employed for electronic toll collection on highways? What are its advantages and limitations? What are the proposed changes that will make this process seamless? Would this transition carry any political hazards? 4 questions in one. Answer them in the order asked: technology, advantages, and limitations. Then proposed changes, then hazards. So 4 paragraphs, 4 mark blocks. So part 1 is the technology. FASTag. FASTag, a passive RFID tag affixed to the windscreen read by an overhead reader at the plaza, which debits a linked prepaid wallet or bank account. It is interoperable across issuers through NPCI with the National Electronic Toll Collection Program, run operationally by IHMCL, a company under NHAI. So mandatory on national highways for the relevant vehicle classes since 15th February 2021, with a double toll penalty for using a FASTag lane without a valid tag. Comes to the scale, around 1,150 plus fee plazas on national highways and expressways, with the overwhelming majority of toll transactions now electronic. And the newest layer is the FASTag annual pass introduced 15th August 2025 for non-commercial cars, jeeps and vans. Priced at 3,075 for 2026-2027, valid for 1 year or 200 crossings, whichever comes first, across national highway and expressway plazas. As of June 2026, over 77 lakh passes issued and about 63 crore transactions, roughly a third of all electronic toll transactions by cars, jeeps and vans. So comes to the part 2, that is advantages and limitations. Comes to the advantages part. Waiting time at plaza cut sharply, with fuel and idling emissions reduced, cash handling, pilferage and leakage largely eliminated, an auditable digital trail with collection cost down, national interoperability through one instrument, and the enabling of passes, exemptions and analytics. And comes to limitations part. The barrier remains vehicles must still slow, queue and stop. Charging is a flat rate between plazas, so you pay the same whether you travel 2 kilometers or 40. Tag failures, blacklisting, and false deductions create disputes the user must chase. So plaza spacing is fixed by contract, not by distance traveled. And enforcement is weak against cloned or mismatched plates and tags. The core limitation is structural and worth naming as such. FASTag digitized the payment but did not remove the plaza. It made a queue faster. It did not abolish the queue. Then the third one, that is part 3, the proposed changes. Two distinct technologies are in play, and confusing them is the commonest error. That is multi-lane free flow using ANPR plus FASTag, high performance automatic number plate recognition cameras with AI analytics working alongside the existing FASTag RFID readers, and overhead gantries with no barrier at all. The vehicle is identified by plate and by tag. The fee is deducted without stopping, slowing, or staying in a lane. So this is the route the ministry has actually taken to implementation. Reported as awarded for 17 toll plazas, of which 5 are operational. Koryasi in Gujarat, Munka in Delhi, Garonda in Haryana, and Manoharpur and Daulatpura in Rajasthan, and GNSS Daulatpura in Rajasthan. And GNSS are satellite based tolling, and on board unit in the vehicle communicating with navigation satellites, charging strictly by the exact distance traveled on geofenced highways, with ANPR gantries as a secondary enforcement layer. This is the genuinely transformative option because it makes tolling distance based rather than plaza based and removes the physical plaza altogether. So, so we have to state the status carefully. The ministry clarified in April 2025 that no decision had been taken on nationwide satellite based tolling and that an ANPR FASTag barrier less system would be implemented at selected plazas instead. The minister has separately spoken of nationwide barrier free tolling by the end of 2026. The right formulation for an answer is multi-lane free, multi-lane, multi-lane free flow using ANPR and FASTag is being implemented now. GNSS. GNSS remains the stated long-term direction. Long-term direction. GNSS remain the stated long-term direction and has not been notified for nationwide rollout. So you do not write that India has switched to satellite tolling. And the international precedent from the economic survey, Singapore's electronic road pricing, gantry based charging from 1998, and ERP 2.0, which extends pricing beyond fixed gantries using GPS based pay as you drive charging. Singapore's area licensing scheme cut car entries into the central business district by about 45%. ERP achieved a further 10 to 15% reduction on express highways during charged periods. That is the exactly architecture India is proposing, already tested, citing it lifts the answer out of the domestic frame. The part 4 is the hazards, and this is where the question is one. What are those hazards? What are those hazards? The examiner asked, would this transition carry any potential hazards? An invitation give 6 hazards. First one is privacy and surveillance. A GNSS system does not record that you passed a plaza. It records where your vehicle was continuously. That is a location database data set of a different order. And India's answer to it, purpose limitation, retention limits, consent has to be built into the system, not added afterwards. And second one is misreads and wrongful deduction. ANPR depends on reading plate correctly. ANPR depends on reading a plate correctly in rain, dust, glare, and at a speed. A misread is a wrong deduction from the wrong person, and the burden of correcting it falls on the user. So redress currently runs through that 1033 helpline, a dedicated email for false deductions, issuer bank helplines, and the Rajmarga Yatra app, which is a grievance mechanism, not a prevention mechanism. And the third one is plate cloning and spoofing. Once identification is by number plate, cloning a plate is toll theft and worse is attributable to an innocent registered owner. The fourth one is enforcement by e-notice and due process. Barrier-less tolling removes the physical choke point where non-payment was caught. Enforcement therefore shifts to post-facto notices, penalties and registration consequences, which means an administrative penalty imposed on machine's evidence with a short window to contest. That is a due process design question, not a technology question. And the fifth one is exclusion under the digital divide. A system with no cash lane and no barrier presumes a functioning bank link, an active KYC, and a working device. Every one of those fails for someone. The sixth one is concentration and systemic risk. A single national clearing house processing every toll transaction is a single point of failure, and outage is a nationwide outrage. So the tolling sentence is finally FASTag digitalized the payment. Multi-lane free flow removes the barrier. GNSS would remove the plaza itself and change by the kilometer. Each step buys time and fuel, and each step trades a physical choke point for a data one. So the engineering question is, can we read the vehicle? Has largely been answered. The governance question have not. Who holds the location record? How long for? Who bears the cost of a misread? And what due process attaches to penalty imposed on machine evidence? A tolling system that is a seamless for the compliant and unappealable for the wrongly charged is not a completed reform. So tolling is the state charging for a road it built. UDAN is the state paying for a route nobody would fly. Both are answers to the same question: what do you do when the asset exists and economics do not? Then we are moving to the next scene, that is 2024 question: UDAN. What is the need for expanding the regional air connectivity in India? In this context, discuss the government's UDAN scheme and its achievements. These are three parts in the question, answered in the questions order. First one need, second one scheme, and third one achievements. And the achievements given honestly, which means giving the conversion rates as well as the totals. The need was never demand. It was the geography of access. Before RCS UDAN launched in 2016, India had 74 airports with scheduled operations. A country this size with 74 functioning airports is a country where flying is a metropolitan service. The problem was not congestion at busy airports. It was that small airport routes cannot pay for themselves at any fare or any fare a regional passenger will accept. That is a market failure, and it defines the instrument. If the route cannot pay, the state either does without it, runs it itself, or pays the cap. And UDAN is the third. The architecture. UDAN is a component of the National Civil Aviation Policy 2016, released 15th June 2016. The scheme was launched 21st October 2016, applicable for 10 years from notification, with the first flight on 27th April 2017, Shimla to Delhi. So airlines are selected as selected airline operators through rounds of bidding, 5 so far. Viability gap funding is paid by the Regional Air Connectivity Fund Trust. On the airport side, the CCEA approved 4,500 crore, and the Expenditure Finance Committee a further 1,000 crore for 50 more airports, heliports, and water aerodromes. So the two-sided design here, because most answers miss it. UDAN is not one subsidy but two: viability gap funding to the airline on the route side, and the second one, capital grants on the airport side to receive airstrips that exist but do not function. So neither works alone. An airline cannot fly to an airport with no terminal, and a received airport with no viable route is an asset with no traffic. The outcomes as on 31st December 2025, 923 valid available RCS routes allotted, 657 operationalized, connecting 93 unreserved and underserved airports, including 15 heliports and 2 water aerodromes. So 215 RCS airports identified, including 25 water aerodromes and 64 helipads. over 159 lakh passengers on 3.34 lakh RCS flights. Viability gap funding disbursed 4,472.29 crore. Airport development 4,500 crore plus 140.04 crores. So 4640.04 crore and letters of intent for 287 routes under UDAN 5.1 to 5.5. Now the three computations that turn a recitation into an elevation, recitation into an evaluation. What are the three computations? The first one is the conversion rate. 657 of 923 allotted routes were operationalized. 71.2%, 266 routes, 28.8% were awarded and never flew. So state it, then explain rather than deplore. A bid-based scheme with a fixed per seat subsidy will always produce awards the winner latter finds unavailable. A scheme converting every single route would be one whose subsidy was set too generously. And the second one is the airport side converts more slowly than route side. 93 of 215 identified airports, 43.3%, which is what the two-side design predicts. Awarding a route is a contract. Reviving an airstrip is a construction project. A third one is, and this is the strongest defensive number available on UDAN. 4,472.29 crore of viability gap funding across 3.34 lakh flights is about 13,390 per flight. Across 159 lakh passengers, about 2 rupees 281 per passenger. Total public cost with an airport development 9,112.33 crore over 9 years. 281 per passenger is a very cheap connectivity instrument by the standards of any transport mode in this paper. And the harnessed regional qualification, which is the scene's sharpest paragraph, is in the northeast 164 routes awarded, 90 operationalized. 52 aerodromes identified, 12 operationalized. Route conversion in the northeast is 54.9% against 71.2 nationally. Aerodrome conversion is 23.1% against 43.3. The region with the strongest connectivity case runs at roughly half of the nation conversion on both measures. Terrain, weather, land and construction seasons, not policy intent. Looking forward, the ministry commits to continuing beyond April 2027 through an expanded UDAN framework focused on hilly, northeastern and aspirational regions with around 120 new destinations. Variants include UDAN 5.1 for helicopters and seaplane guidelines under 5.5. The UDAN sentence is what? Regional air regional air connectivity was a market failure problem before it was a policy problem. India had 74 airports with scheduled operations in 2016 and thin regional routes cannot cover their costs at any fare a regional passenger will pay. So UDAN's response is two-sided. Viability gap funding, viability gap funding to selected airline operators through the Regional Air Connectivity Fund, Trust, and capital grants to revive airports that existed but did not function. On the record, 657 of 923 allotted routes have been operationalized, connecting 93 airports and carrying over 159 lakh passengers on 3.34 lakh flights for 4,472 crore of route subsidy and 4,640 crore of airport development. So two numbers inside that record matter more than the totals. So the conversion rate is 71.2%, which is neither failure nor triumph, but the expected output, a bid based subsidy, a scheme converting every route would be one that had overpaid. And the route subsidy works out at roughly 2,281 rupees per passenger carried, which makes UDAN one of the cheapest connectivity. So instruments in India's transport policy, the honest qualification is regional. Regional. In the northeast, where the case is strongest, route conversion is 54.9%, aerodrome conversion is 23.1%, about half the national rate on both. Because the constraint there is a terrain and construction rather than design. Udan did not make regional flying profitable. It made regional flying possible and then paid the difference for about 280 rupees a passenger. So moving people, not vehicles. The 2014 question 12.5 markers. National urban transport policy emphasizes on moving people instead of moving vehicles. Discuss critically the success of the various strategies of the government in this regard. So we have to start with the what the phrase actually means, because most answers never define it. A road widened to move more vehicle carries more cars and the same number of people. A bus lane on the same road carries fewer vehicles and far more people. The National Urban Transport Policy of 2006 committed India to planning for person throughput rather than vehicle throughput. The word critically in this question is asking whether India then did that. The strategies and the honest about each. Metro rail, the visible success and a partial one. Metro networks have expanded across a large number of cities. They move people at very high person throughput on corridors they serve. But a metro corridor infrastructure, metro is a corridor infrastructure. It works only where density supports it and only if the first and last mile are solved. Where feeder services are missing, ride ridership underperforms the projection, and the projection is what justified the capital. So bus system, the neglected instrument. A bus is the cheapest person through out in the toolbox and receives the least capital. Bus rapid transit in India has an uneven record, largely because a BRT corridor takes road space from cars and is politically reversible. Electric bus procurement through demand aggregation is the current instrument. And non-motorized transport, mostly rhetorical. Footpaths and cycling infrastructures are named in the every plan and funded in very few. And demand management, the missing leg here is, and the survey now says so. The economic survey argues for targeted congestion pricing is dense in dense business districts combined with demand based parking management, and points to the Chennai metropolitan area parking policy 2025, which disincentivize private vehicle use, treats parking as valuable real estate, and prioritizes walking, cycling, and public transport. The international evidence, Singapore's area licensing scheme cut central business districts car entries by about 45%, and London's congestion charge was adopted precisely because the road network was old, narrow, and could not be widened. So managing demand replaced supplying road space. And note the equity lessons from Singapore, because it is the strongest thing you can say about congestion pricing. The primary obstacle was public resistance to monetizing road use, and the argument that it favors the wealthy. Singapore answered it. not with argument but with immediate compensating benefits, a park and ride network and better buses, and by framing the charge is as a traffic optimization rather than revenue. Congestion pricing is politically feasible only when it is bundled with a visible alternative, and the innovation worth naming because almost nobody will. The Kochi Water Metro operationalized since 2023, 15 routes across about 78 kilometers connecting 10 islands through 38 terminals, 819 crore project financed partly by an 85 million euro concessional loan from KfW run by a special purpose vehicle with the government of Kerala at 70%, 74% and Kochi Metro Rail at 26%. So air-conditioned electric hybrid ferries built by Cochin Shipyard on lithium titanate oxide batteries integrated with the metro through unified ticketing. Cumulative ridership has crossed 5 million. A 75 million, a 75-kilometer water metro network can reportedly be built at roughly one-tenth of cost of a comparable elevated metro corridor. And the model is being replicated in 21 cities. The critical verdict. The critical verdict. What is the critical verdict? Write this as your conclusion. India adopted the right principle in 2006 and then funded the wrong instrument. Capital went overwhelmingly into rail-based corridors, which are the most expensive form of person throughput. Buses, footpaths, and demand management, which are the cheapest, went underfunded. The national urban transport policy's failure is not conceptual. It is institutional. Urban transport in India has no single accountable authority. Roads, buses, metro, parking, and land use sit with different agencies, different levels, different agencies at different levels of government, and person throughput is nobody's key performance indicator. Unified metropolitan transport authorities were recommended precisely for this and have largely not been empowered until one body owns the outcome. The policy will keep describing a destination that no institution is responsible for reaching. So hold that phrase, person throughput is nobody's KPI. Because the next question asks what a smart city is, and the answer turns out to be same institutional problem wearing a technology clothes, that is what a smart city actually needs. The 2016 question, 12.5 marker question, what are smart cities, examine their relevance for urban development in India. Will it increase rural urban differences? Give arguments for smart villages in the light of PURA and urban mission. Three or four programs these question names are effectively retired. So do not build the answer on scheme description. Retire the shell. Keep the theme. What smart was supposed to mean? Area based development plus a technology layer. Sensors, integrated command centers, data driven service delivery delivered through special purpose vehicles designed to sidestep municipal capacity rather than build it. And that last class is the finding. An SPV, special purpose vehicle, that bypasses the municipal corporation, delivers a project and leaves the corporation exactly as weak as it found it. The instrument was designed around the constraint instead of it. So state the durable question directly here. A city cannot be governed by sensors if it cannot answer three prior questions. Who owns what can be taxed, and what is where? And on all three, Indian urban government is weak in a way that has nothing to do with technology. Who owns what can be taxed, and what is where? On the informational base, urban and records, urban land records are not maintained outside a few states such as Tamil Nadu, Maharashtra, and Gujarat. That is the Department of Land Resources' own statement of the problem. Naksha exists to solve. Naksha was launched in Feb 2025 as a 1 year pilot in 157 urban local bodies with Survey of India as technical partner. On the fiscal base, 16th Finance Commission local body grants 7,91,493 crore, split 80% basic and 20% performance with two new urban grant heads and an urban challenge fund rupees 10,000 crore. Now the rural urban question the paper actually asks. Pura, PURA, urban shared one premise. That answer to rural disadvantage is to deliver urban amenities without requiring urban migration. The honest verdict is that the premise was sound and the instrument was too small, neither operated at a scale capable of shifting a gap driven by where non-farm work is located. And there is a symmetry that ties the chapter to chapter 11. Swamitwa's stated objectives include enabling property tax to accrue to Gram Panchayats. Rural local government is being given a fiscal base built on a property record. Urban local government still largely lacks one. The rural program is doing what the urban program assumed has already been done. So the smart city sentences here, the smart cities mission defined smart as a technology. The smart cities mission defines smart as a technology layer over a area based development delivered through special purpose vehicles designed to work around municipal capacity rather than to build it, which is why the projects were delivered and the corporations were left as weak as they were found. The durable question in the 2016 paper was reaching for is not about sensors. A city cannot be planned, taxed, or serviced unless it can answer who owns what and what is where. And Indian labor government is weak. Indian urban government is weak on precisely that. The Department of Land Resources own account of why Naksha was launched across 157 urban local bodies in 2025 is the non-maintenance of urban land records outside a handful of states. On the rural urban question, Pura urban rested on a sound premise urban amenities with urban with urban amenities without urban migration, but operated far below the scale needed to shift a gap driven by the location of non-farm work. The instructive contrast is that Swamitwa is now building a rural property record explicitly to give Gram Panchayatis a tax base, which is the informational and physical foundation the urban program assured already existed. A smart city is not a city with sensors. It is a city that knows who owns what, can tax it, and can plan around it. India built the sensors first. The next thing they get, the next scene is PLI, rationale, and the number nobody quotes. What is PLI? The 2025 question discuss the rationale of the production linked incentive scheme. What are its achievements? In what way can the functioning and outcomes of the scheme be improved? This scene and the next discharge it together. The rationale in one sentence, India had subsidized the inputs to manufacturing for 60 years and had not produced globally competitive manufacturing. PLI subsidies output, subsidized PLI subsidizes output. That distinction is not cosmetic. That distinction is what? That distinction is not cosmetic. An input subsidy, cheap land, cheap capital, a tax holiday, is paid before the firm performs. The state carries the risk. An output subsidy is paid after against verified incremental production above a threshold within a window. The firm carries the risk for rationalize and give all four. Scale incentives are threshold linked, so they reward firms that get large, not firms that merely exist. The missing link in value chains India assembled imported components exported little. So import substitution through competitiveness rather than tariffs. A tariff makes the imported good expensive and raises consumer prices, while an output incentive makes the domestic good cheaper and does not. And anchoring supply chain relocation. The post 2020 window was open for a few years, and PLI was India's bid for it. The record to September 2025 launched 2020 14 sectors an outlay of 1.97 lakh crore and 806 applications approved. Investment realized over 2.0 lakh crore incremental production, over 18.70 lakh crore exports, over 8.20 lakh crore employment, over 12.60 lakh, and incentives actually dispersed 23,946 crore of a 1.97 lakh crore outlay is 12.2% 5 years in. This is the single most important number in the PLI record, and it's almost never quoted. It cuts two ways, and a good answer gives both. It is evidence design. It is evidence design the works. Low disbursement against a large commitment is exactly what an outcome linked scheme looks like when thresholds are enforced. Fiscal exposure has been a fraction of fiscal commitment, and it invalidates the commonest critic. Any answer saying the government spent 1.97 lakh crore and got X is factually wrong. The government committed 1.97 lakh crore. It has paid 23,946 crore. Then moving to electronics asymmetry and how PLI improves. The sharpest content in this chapter and a computed finding rather than a quoted one. Electronics under the large scale electronics manufacturing scheme against all of PLI. Production 9.34 lakh crore of 18.70 lakh crore. 49.9% export 5.12 lakh crore of 8.20 lakh crore, that is 62.4%. Investment 13,759 crore of 2.0 lakh crore, 6.9%. One scheme delivers half of all PLI production and nearly two-thirds of its exports and on under 7% of its investment. That is an output to investment ratio of about 68 times against a program average of 9.3, a ratio than that far above average is the signature of final assembly, high throughput, low fixed capital, value added mostly by imported components. This is not a criticism. Assembly at scale, how we assembly at scale is how Vietnam began, how Mexico began, how China began, and how India became the world's second largest mobile phone manufacturer. 300 plus units from 2 in 2014 and mobile production from 18,000 crore in financial year 2015 to 5.45 lakh crore in financial year 2025. But it explains better than any policy document why the electronics component manufacturing scheme was notified in April 2025. That too with 22,919 crore. 22,919 crore. Components are where the capital intensity and the value addition sit. One caution on evidence, that is, the survey publishes a domestic value addition figure of 83.74% of for pharmaceuticals and none for electronics. The survey publishes a domestic value addition figure of 83.74% for pharmaceuticals and none for electronics. State that contrast in your answer and let the 6.9% investment ratio carry the inference. So you do not quote an electronics DVA figure. Now the third part of the 2025 question improvement for each following from the above data rather than from generic advice. The first one is move the incentive down the value chain. The asymmetry is the diagnosis. The electronics component manufacturing scheme does this. Extend the logic sector by sector. And second one, the publish domestic value addition. Public domestic value addition. Domestic value addition is the only metric that distinguishes manufacturing from assembly. And the survey publishes it for pharma and not electronics. This is the strongest single line available on this question. And third one, build sunset discipline into the design. State exit conditions in advance and publish performance against them. And fourth one is connect to PLI to the cluster, not just the firm, which is what the national manufacturing missions 22-30 cluster define design encodes. On that mission announced in budget 2025-2026 and its status is proposed, never say launched. Its 2035 targets are manufacturing from 12.9% of GDP to 25%, 143 million jobs and exports of $1.2 trillion. And it uses three archetypes: scale for automotive and pharmaceuticals, fix and transform for electronics and capital goods, and seed for semiconductors and electric vehicles. Never quote the 25% target without naming its 12.9% base. So note where the government puts electronics, fix and transform, not scale. The government does not think electronics is finished either. And the archetype are themselves an admission. One instrument cannot serve three different sectoral conditions. The production linked incentive scheme is usually assessed on its headline. Over 18.7 lakh crore of incremental production against a 1.97 lakh crore outlay. Two figures inside that record matter more. First, only 23,946 crore of outlay has actually been dispersed. Because payment is linked to verified output, the fiscal exposure has been about an eighth of the commitment, which is the design working rather than falling. The second one is the electronics scheme alone accounts for half of PLI productions and nearly two-thirds of its exports are under 7% of its investment. An output to investment ratio roughly 68 against a program average of 9.3. That ratio describes assembly, not deep manufacturing. PLI has succeeded in attaching India to global electronics value chains. Whether it has moved India up them is the harder question. And it is the question the electronics component manufacturing scheme was created to answer. Then comes to semiconductors, the 2025 question. India aims to become a semiconductor manufacturing hub. What are the challenges faced by the semiconductor industry in India? Mention the salient features of the India Semiconductor Mission. So first and foremost, you have to write challenges first. Those are structural. Mission second. The challenges explain why the mission is shaped as it is, and the challenges are structural, not administrative. Do not write lack of skilled manpower and infrastructure. Write the concentration facts. 79.4% of global integrated circuit design revenue sits with the United States, South Korea, Taiwan, and Japan. A modern fab costs about $10 billion. The nanometer precision machines are made by 5 companies across 4 countries. The US, Japan, South Korea hold two-thirds of wafer fabrication, assembly and test equipment sales, and semiconductor R&D as a shape of sales in 2024. The US 17.7, Korea 11.8, Taiwan 11.5, the EU 10.8, China 9.2, Japan 5.7. The survey's own line is worth quoting here. Semiconductors are the most R&D intensive product to produce, more than pharmaceuticals and software. Four challenges follow: capital equipment access, which is geopolitical choke point; process know-how, learned over a decade and not purchasable; and R&D intensity. Now the mission is the India Semiconductor Mission was launched in 2021, and with the Semicon India sits on 76,000 crore framework. Four schemes, each at 50% of project cost, are capital expenditure: semiconductor fabs, display fabs, compound semiconductor, and OSAT, plus a design linked incentive. As of August 2025, 10 projects approved, about 1.60 lakh crore across 6 states. Micron's assembly, the test facility, Tata Electronics fab, one compound semiconductor fab, and packaging facilities and design support, 24 projects and 100 companies. Now the honest scale check here is which separates a good answer from a average one. 1.60 lakh crore is about $18 million. The survey's own figure for a single modern fab is $10 billion. India's entire approved semiconductor pipeline is under two leading edge fabs worth of capital and is weighted to packaging, assembly, testing, and design. So you have to say this as scale, not as failure. The composition is deliberate. Those are the segments where entry is possible without a $10 billion check and a decade of process learning. That sequencing is defensible, and the survey itself calls the mission a first step towards self-sufficiency. What is not defensible is presenting it as through India is about to fabricate leading edge logic chips. The semiconductor sentence here is: India's semiconductor strategy is often read as an attempt to build fabs. Read the approvals instead. 10 projects about 1.6 lakh crore weighted towards assembly, testing, packaging, and design. That is under two leading edge fabs worth of capital, and it is the right shape. Fabrication has the highest capital barrier, the deepest process know-how, and the most concentrated equipment supply. So 5 companies across 4 countries make the machines. Assembly, testing, and design are where a late entrant builds capability, revenue, and a workforce first. The measure of the India semiconductor mission over the next decade is not whether India makes the most advanced chip, but whether India becomes structurally difficult to exclude from the chain that makes it. So, what is the remaining thing? The artifact arrives before the institutions. What are the artifact and arrives before the institution? Look back across the 6 questions this chapter has answered. A tolling gantry that reads a number plate in milliseconds, and a grievance mechanism that puts the burden of a misread on the driver, an airport revived, a route awarded, and 29% of awarded routes that never flew, a metro corridor built in a city where person throughput is nobody's KPI, sensors, command centers, dashboards in cities that cannot say who owns which plot, a factory that assembles half of India's PLI output on 7% of its investment without the component base underneath it. A semiconductor mission in an economy where business funds 41% research against three quarters in every country that makes chips. Six sectors, one pattern. India has become very good at building the thing and slower at building what keeps the thing working. The gantry arrives before the redress system, the airport before the route economics, the metro before the transport authority, the sensors before the land record, the assembly line before the components, the mission before the research base. So this is not a failure of ambition. It is the ordinary sequence of a fast building state, and every country that industrialized quickly did it in this order. But the sequence has a cost, and the cost is that the artifact depreciates while the institutions is still being argued about. So the examinable conclusion for this whole chapter: India's infrastructure and industrial problem is no longer construction, it is the institution that has to arrive afterwards. And the evidence in every one of these six cases is that it arrives late or not at all. So India has learned to build the thing, not yet the thing that keeps the thing working. So what India has learned to build the thing, not yet the thing that keeps the thing working. So this is regarding all about these industries and policies, etc. With this, we completed entire economy GS-III marathon as far as mains 2026 is concerned. Thank you and all the best.